folks. Welcome to somewhere else. This is my first big Eurorack patch. It's called Theta, and I thought I'd put together some notes and thoughts about it, and Eurorack in general, before I took it apart. You should see the video available down in the description below, the 2-hour-long meditative video, as well as a variation of it in the description of that video, or I'll put it in this one too, I guess, if you care for a little more noise from the bass. First thing I thought I'd show you is just what this thing sounds like when it first boots up as a case. It's like it's crying out for anything loaded into me. And then we're right into this sound. We'll track this patch from the outside in, so this is our final output right here. It comes from the Mimeophon completely, and the mix knob is about there, a third of the way up. So everything in this patch is mono before it runs through the Mimeophon, and that's what gives it any kind of stereo space at all. In this mixer then, we have the 4 main elements of this sound. So this is the main loop that you hear, and of course it sings other melodies too. That's on channel 2 here. On the leftmost channel, that's this sound, this whole cymbal-y, backyard, metalworks drone. Then on channel 3, it's already volumed up, but the system isn't running it right now, is the bass. And so channel 3, it kind of, this VCA in fact right here that you can see, maybe I'll try to point out all the lights that you can look at. Actually, skew should be on. But maybe I'll point out all the lights that you can look at through the performance to actually see like where the signal's coming from. So that's the bass on channel 3, and we'll talk about it more when we get to it. And finally on channel 4 here, I can turn it up, but you also still won't hear anything. It's that rain sound. In fact, here, why don't I force it to play for a moment here. Here you go. So this is that rain sound. It's really just some vinyl scratching, which of course now you can definitely tell. But if I turn it down and run it through beats, it can sound like some rain if you want it to. So we will cover all of these patches in about that order. I realize that I should also probably mention that the leftmost column here on the sequencer, this governs the main loop. These 2 columns here grouped together, that's the bass. This column here controls the Mimeophon. And finally, this last column, column 8 here, directly plays from the NerdSeq, those rain samples. So let's start with the main loop here. It's channel 2 on this mixer. And that's playing from the right deck here of the Lubadh. Both decks of the Lubadh are playing a little Wurlitzer clip that I played in and recorded, and then eventually recorded into my modular system from my computer. And the right deck, I recorded it from the left deck, using basically the same trigger step trick that Jason shows off in the Lubadh YouTube video if you go watch it. So you can... I always want to have fun playing with this, but I can never figure out quite how it works. So from the Lubadh here, let's trace the signal path first, and I'll tell you a couple things about it. This main sound comes through this Tanh right here, which you can see is sort of barely driven. I'm not even sure if it's doing anything, but it's just sort of how I ran it, and I'm sure I turned the knob until it sounded nice. And then from there, it just goes straight in the mixer. There's very, very little processing on anything that happens on this sound, because recording it twice from through the Lubadh already just made it sound so gorgeous. I mean, listen to it. And of course, then we can... And of course, this sequence then brings us into the really only other interesting thing to talk about, this Lubadh here. And that's the fact that from this right deck, we are actually running, the Lubadh gives you sort of, you can see this flashing light on the right side here, possibly. I'll try to put my finger here so you can see it reflect off of that. And you can even see it through the flashing LED of this cable here, if you can see that. And so this tempo, as you can see, it blinks faster when it plays higher, is linked to the length of this loop. And that tempo is actually what it's this one right here, is actually running when I'm running into the clock of my sequencer, and I'm just interpreting that as steps. What that means is a few things. First of all, the tempo is not stable. Second of all, nobody's in control of the tempo. This light that you see here is literally the tempo at which the whole thing runs. It's this kind of interesting dance between these two, neither of which know they're in charge and neither of which know they're not in charge. It also lends this rhythm the characteristic speed that it does, because you can see how time advances more slowly when we're in this base state, and when we get high, it runs a lot quicker. And so there's really no defined exact rhythm to that. I guess you could sit down and do the math on it, but I'm not going to. And apart from the fact that eventually I have it also play that note, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. I guess the only other thing is that these pitches you can see is a C sharp 5, D5, and then I guess A sharp 4 is a tiny bit further away, but the pitches are very close together. Because these pitches aren't actually anything the Lubadh cares about, it's just reading CV voltage. The range that I'm working with here, it causes these steps with kind of the smallest increments I have, if that makes any sense. I just kind of put in adjacent notes and it did all this. So I think a lot of how the time and pitch of this patch works kind of speaks to, like, I don't know how music like sorts itself out. Everything's technically in constant time, everything's technically playing just off this clip, but it can do that. So that's its main channel. Alright, let's move on to this cymbal patch before my camera falls further and I have to adjust it again. So channel 1 here on the mixer is this very lovely, I'll turn it up higher than it is in the actual piece. This very lovely, lovely cymbal soundscape. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually the same clip that I'm playing on the right deck of the Lubadh, so here I can slow this down. That's actually really pretty too, I should use that for something. And again, this is actually just a Wurlitzer. It's a Wurlitzer. I'll play you the original clip right now. And so you can hear that it's playing backwards and quickly, and I'm messing with it, but that is fundamentally what's happening there. It's a Wurlitzer at heart. So what are we doing with it? Well, first of all, we're reading out this tempo and we're resetting this LFO over here. And we're just using it as a reset signal to kind of like trip up this pretty quick LFO. And the only reason we're doing that is it just causes these nice little kind of spikes in the audio that later on other machines are going to pick up on. And so that's just an LFO that we're feeding into the Mum8 here. And in fact, the Mum8 is where our audio is coming from the Lubadh. So the Mum8, I'm just using it to do some processing before we feed the audio into the Crucible. That's our eventual goal here. The Crucible is an incredible, amazing module. When I first got into modular, my belief was that the joy or the importance of it for me was access to some specific modules. I got any of this because of the Osiris. I picked up the Crucible and the Kraken because I just couldn't believe how they sounded. And the Crucible has this incredible extra feature that you can directly feed its resonance circuits with audio or anything you want. So internally, the way the Crucible works is it has all these different resonance circuits that feed back amongst each other. And that's what creates these metallic rings. And when you hit it with a stick with any of its trigger inputs, it's just exciting those circuits. What you're doing here, if you pipe your own input in, is you're exciting it yourself, right? What that means is that you can feed whole audio into it. And so the Mum8 here, the purpose of it is really just to get it to ring the way it does and to get the music to come through, because yes, the Crucible can feed audio through, but it usually comes out sounding like a metal stick or a metal disc is trying to play your song. It takes a little bit of work, and that's where also this tuning comes from, between the exact speed this is playing at. We'll reset the screen here. The exact screen this is playing at, the pitch here on the Crucible, those little spikes in the reset that I was telling you about earlier, and the resonance on the Mum8. If I turn this resonance up, you'll hear like it'll get... Well, that's maybe a little bit of self-oscillation too, but you can hear how like the Crucible was latching onto that and doing something with it. And that's heavily to do with the exact tuning of these circuits and the exact pitches that they're set at. And of course the Mum8 also filters out just a lot of stuff that would set the Crucible, especially on the sort of like dirty cymbal mode that I have, not the tortilla mode, or tortilla chip, is that what they call it, Dorito mode? But the sizzle cymbal mode, which is what it seems like it really is. And that's why you also hear the little metal rattling from time to time, is because I have it on sizzle cymbal mode, but it does make it more reactive. And so you have to tame the signal before it gets in here. And everybody says the Mum8 and the original Akai came from is great at chewing up complex signals. So far we've made the journey from the left deck of the Lubadh down to the Mum8 to filter it out. We've talked a lot about the Crucible, so I don't think we need to talk about it anymore. We've come through there. And you can see that out of the Crucible, we've headed into another filter, the Carbon. So just the cymbal alone takes up 2 filters. And the purpose of this filter, largely, is to make those metal rings, you see it just came back in, to make those metal rings come in and out. So if I change this knob, you can hear, now suddenly you're just hearing it. It's really only when I turn it over around here that then this LFO that we're feeding it, which comes back through this attenuation, but ultimately just from this Batumi, can kind of fade the little sizzles in and out. So it's just moving that cutoff point just above and just below where you can hear it. And it's kind of amazing that it doesn't really sound like it's being filtered in and out as it goes. From there, we're just feeding that output into the mixer. So 2 channels from the Batumi, maybe through some replication or attenuation, but 2 channels from the Batumi helping out the Lubadh, running to the Mum8 just to clean it up, to the Crucible to make it into this beautiful cymbal soundscape, through the Carbon to modulate the sizzles in and out, and then we're going to the mixer. So that all just runs on its own permanently. The sequencer doesn't know about it at all, except for I do hit the retrig on it, and that's why you see it come around and glitch out. And sometimes it'll come around a whole circle and then glitch out there twice. And that's just because I do just, for some variety, have a couple triggers in here to spice it up. Alright, so I've reset your position, and let's talk about the bass. So the bass is powered mostly by these two modules right here, which are just an absolute lethal pair. We have the Osiris, which is a wavetable oscillator, and the VCF1 from Erica Synths. Now, I don't know what it is about this Osiris, if it's the 96 kilohertz, or if it's the amazing wavetable overtones, or any of the other things that are happening in it, but whatever it is, it spits out exactly the kind of dirt that this VCF1, the Polyvox, just absolutely loves. They're eating each other up. It's amazing. Let's play it. So, the bass is always droning. You can see the decay is all the way up, the VCA is all the way up. It's always trying to play sound. It's a combination of this javelin right here, as well as this VCA. I don't even know why the javelin's on loop. As well as this VCA that are governing the volume and actually letting you hear anything come through, which you should be hearing right about now. So you can, as you can see, now that the patch is running, or this part of the pattern is running, this gate fires, which allows the javelin to open up and let sound through. We're using the VCA down in the left corner here of the javelin, which is an envelope generator if you don't know. So, and again, this came up, and that's sort of like the main fader on the volume there. Now back to the wavetable, the Osiris for just a second here. Like many people, I have not left bank 1 of the stock samples. I have also barely left sort of this third of the Wave X knob, but the Wave Y knob, we're actually modulating through this cable right here, and which is being attenuated through a duet and coming from a very slow LFO, free-running LFO up here. And so that just means we're slowly exploring the Y table. Now this up and down octave thing you're hearing, that's the timbre mode on this Osiris. And it's being driven by this disting right here. I think it's about to go up. You should be able to, if you can see it at all, you can see that just changed from blue to red as it was going up. And so this disting, I spent a very long time trying to turn this knob by the tiniest amount to get this LFO as slow as I possibly could get it. I'm probably going to switch this out for something else. And that runs into the timbre amount here. On the very left timbre mode here, the Osiris gives you sort of this modulatable octave doubler, where it's not just an octave shift. You can, as you can hear, feed in an intermediate value. It'll give you any value along that octave. It's kind of an interesting way to get even another tone and pitch out of the Osiris than you already can. And so this disting right here with the LFO is just absolutely slamming it rail to rail, and that's how we get these perfect octaves up and down and up and down. On the Osiris itself still, we also actually have a pitch coming in. We can run another cycle here. Bam. So we also have pitch coming to the Osiris, and the only reason we do that is for that one note that sometimes happens where it goes ooh, doo, doo. And I don't know why I tried to sing that note for you just now, and I don't know why I put like a Blade Runner hit in the middle of a relaxing meditative ambient soundscape. But I guess somewhere in my head maybe I heard this bass as like maybe like a very interesting sound and very cool and definitely part of the soundscape, but definitely like a sinister or maybe not entirely wanted part of the soundscape. I'm not sure, but it seemed to fit, and I haven't had any problem with it ever since programming it in. So finally, let's talk about the filter. The filter input, you can see, comes from this gray cable, which there are some cables that run off the bottom of the rack here and come back up, and I tried to make sure there was only one of every color, so if you really wanted to, you could sit here and figure out where it went, but it goes here, or it comes from here. And that's just a summation of, first of all, the javelin. So every time you can see this light pulsating up and down, so that has an effect on the filter already. And that's just being run by the gate again. And then we also have this input from the Zadar. So the Zadar, its role here is more to add some elements of randomness and surprise, but mostly to add to this sense of like watching this thinking, shifting thing that you can see into its thoughts. I really wanted the default pattern here, which just cycles through different random patterns, to really like feel like it was sifting through possible things it might do. And the moment it goes into cycle here, it will stop choosing random shapes. And I'll show you a little bit how we do that directly via the NerdSeq. And so once we go into pattern, of course, we run the Zadar. You can see right here, it's most of the way through. I can't stop buying these chaos devices modules. I don't know what it is about them. They just speak to me. But yeah, so all of that governs this filter right here. And over the course of the performance, actually, I've had this very muted because that's kind of how the piece ends, and I haven't touched it. Probably good for me to talk over. But that's the long bass cycle, and that's the one that's driven off the Zadar. There's also a short bass cycle, and that's this one. And what's mostly interesting about that isn't necessarily what you just heard, because all I do is just, open all the gates on everything and let her sing for a second. The most interesting thing about that one is when it happens. Because here, I guess I'll get a little bit into the sequencing now. For the most part, especially 0D here, oh, well, it just randomly decided to do it again. 0D here, 0F here, 08 here, and 1B here are all sort of like idle programs. They just cycle through over, and you can see there's nothing on them. They just cycle through over and over and over again, and then over here, we'll find some little surprises. So I turn the probability of the third column very low. At the very bottom of it, there's a small chance, you can see also on the patch screen here, the current FX3 probability is 2 out of 64. It's that much out of that bar. And so there's that much chance that when it reaches this step, it's going to start sequence pattern 304. These two features between each other give a lot of really incredible random and thinking and shifting and generative and even programming sort of capabilities to the NerdSeq. Because from any pattern, you can trigger any pattern on the main sequence. You can trigger a different track from one track. In fact, we do that when the long bass cycle goes into motion. You can see that every time I start 10, shortly after 13 will start. But there's a little additional trick beyond that we're doing. It's not just I set the probability very low and sometimes it'll happen. There's one more thing that we're feeding into there, and that's this input that's coming out of the disting. What I really wanted to try to capture, because there's this binary output, you see? It just turned from red to blue. I don't know if you are in an angle where you can see that. But this binary output gives us a little bit of insight into what the bass is actually doing. And I wanted to be able to try to have the interesting bass growl always happen when the bass is necessarily doing something interesting, which the most reliable interesting thing it does is that octave up and down and up and down. And so what I'm actually doing, we can go into the Automate tab here and we can look at this first CV in. And if I page down, and one quirk of the NerdSeq as you're learning it, and let me know, I know Cuckoo did some videos about the NerdSeq when it first came out, but I don't think they were comprehensive, and definitely the thing has gained an incredible number of features since then. So let me know if people are interested in hearing more and more in depth about the NerdSeq, because it's been a very interesting learning process, and I am nothing but awed by this machine, honestly. But one quirk of the NerdSeq is that this LFO live display bar right here, which is incredibly handy, it's always nice to see. What are you seeing? It will not update until like after you open the pane, it will not update that bar until there's actually a change in the CV. So you can see it's jumping up and down as this signal jumps up and down. Once again, I'll try to stick my finger here so you can see the reflection of the light if you can't see it already. So, and any day now, bam, blue. So then it jumped down, right? And so I've just kind of carefully set the offset and the amplification of that signal. So just, you know, just like turning a knob on any other module for how high and how wide. So that when it comes up, it really doesn't even add that much probability. And in fact, when it's down here, I'm not sure if this negative causes the probability to go negative, because the patch screen doesn't update, I don't think, for modulation, automation modulation like this. Like you can always see the probability, but I think this is only based off of what the track thinks, not what the automation is then adding to it, if that makes any sense. But the bottom line here is that when it's low, either it's completely choking off the probability or it's doing nothing. And when it's high, it's just barely high. And what I wanted is just for there to be that one, see? That one little more opportunity for something interesting to be happening while the bass is going. And I found maybe because of this slight offset I have on that octave doubling timbre amount, possibly because of that firing it off when it's in whatever this state is, I'm not sure what state it was, on or off, red or blue, but firing it off in one of these two states kind of tended to lead to you just happen to catch that octave doubling move. And so not only is the sequencer kind of like in a conversation with a Lubadh about whether it should, about how fast it should even run, it's also in a conversation with the disting about whether it should let rip with this sort of short bass cycle. So I think that's everything there is to say about the bass, other than the fact that I do have to turn the screen back on every 10 minutes when recording a long modular video like this, or like the 2-hour one, and I worry about the screen. All right, let's cover the rain. Now, the rain is being played directly off the NerdSeq. And it is a very simple, almost 4-second sample, which is a 4-second 8-bit sample. If you choose to put it all in one sample, is just about all the NerdSeq will do for you. It can sample, it can do some pretty cool things with samples, and it can sound really nice, but it's, you know, it's got limits for sure. But that's okay, because that's all we needed. So this is literally just a sort of vinyl dust noise clip that I got off of the place everybody gets everything off of, which I'm not saying because I hate it. I'm not saying because I can't splice. I got it off of Splice. And I just shortened it up and filtered it a little bit, converted it to 8-bit a ton of times, just to try to get the sort of profile right. I think it's still, I could have still done better with it, you know. I didn't at all mind people being able to tell that it's a vinyl noise sample. I think I just wanted it to be able to sound like rain if you wanted it to. And part of that is also, you can see I have a random pitch set, and one of the features that you can, there's always like additional features in the NerdSeq you see here. Like if I hit OK on this RNF, then suddenly I get this additional menu where I can set all these different random ranges just because I've chosen a random value there. So all of this rain plays at a random pitch between A sharp 1 and D2. And that up and down combined with the volume shifts that I also do here, you can see 64, 61, 4D, 5F. And yeah, the hex can be intimidating when you first get into trackers, but if you just try not to think about it too hard and focus mostly on the numbers and how relatively big and small they are, it's not too big of a deal. But between all those like sort of small ups and downs and everything, as well as you can see here sometimes like I take the whole track and I just like make it more or less probable just so that some of these up and down shifts do or don't happen. It just helps like randomize the sample, and I don't really think you can tell that this, I'll let it run for a second. I don't think you can tell that this is just like a 4-second sample. Right? Of course, beads is helping here. I picked up beads while, like, it was pretty much the last thing I slammed in the case while doing this patch, and it definitely does help thicken up the sound. It also does sound a little bit like a reverb, which I wish it didn't, and I'm sure if I were a little better at tuning beads, I could get it to do that a bit less. For example, maybe turn the feedback down a little bit. But overall, I think at the volume that I do play it at, the effect totally works. It's really just meant to tickle the ear a little bit and give like a little bit more variation. Okay, I've pushed your head up again. I'll really figure out at some point how to make this thing not fall over. And there's just a few last thoughts to wrap this thing up. First of all is the Mimeophon over here. Oh, high bass. The Mimeophon also does see a little bit of action through track 6. You can see there's a long cycle, which I won't play, and all it does is it sets, well, okay, all it does. First of all, this was the first track that I started trying to do this random stuff on. So you can see I was setting the probability of the entire row, which meant that I had to set the probability of the whole row back to 100% once I actually wanted to do anything. Otherwise, everything interesting I wanted to do was mostly a chance it wouldn't happen. And it turns out that the trick actually is to set it on track 4 here, because track 4 ignores probability row. And I just left it on all these other effects just to make it very obvious that's what's happening at that moment. I also, in a lot of these longer running tracks, set the clock to divide by like 32. And so they run very slow. And so I don't have to like create a whole ton of waiting tracks here to get through that long cycle. It can just run through the long cycle in place. Then I set the glide mod to a very high value. Glide mod, the manual implies it works one way and it seems to work another. I think the value put in is roughly the number of steps it takes for the glide to get to where you wherever you now set it to. But I'm not sure. If you're not familiar, glide in tracker terms is a little bit like portamento, but for any parameter, in this case the mod, which opens up the repeats over here, which you can also see through here. Mod. It is also actually being added to by this LFO, so it's always kind of coming in and out. Or actually, it's not that LFO, it's this one. But that's just, you know, some additional shaping that I pulled from elsewhere in the circuit that it was already happening, and I just sort of prayed that it would add some beauty. So the repeats are being governed as well as the color. And so for the most part, on the long cycle, the repeats just kind of go up. The color does not at all go up until the very end here, because the moment you open up the color, because that goes into the feedback circuit, the moment you open up the color, the echoes can get very, very busy quickly, which is exactly what I want right at the peak, but not before. So for the most part, you can see the pitch, which is controlling this color, stays the same. And the last bit here, I just kind of slam it up. Go to CA, where like that's the 10th octave C. And then I close it back down afterwards as it comes down. There's also a short cycle reverb, and on the short cycle reverb, I actually even have a self patch here on the NerdSeq. There's not a whole lot to talk about. It's basically the same technique I already just told you about with this disting, reading the value of the disting to figure out when to fire off the short bass. You can see here I have 2, 3, and 4 on the main loop. 3 and 2 sound exactly the same. The only difference between 2 and 3 is at the very end, or I guess here, a bit into pattern 3 here, because pattern 3 leads into that high wailing sound. And so what I wanted was this short reverb cycle, which I also have. It can happen also randomly at any time. It's more or less the same stuff. I just have it run a lot quicker, or you know, I slam it up and then bring it back instead of like slowly bringing it up. And I wanted to have this one be very likely to happen right as we're about to go right there, because I just love the sound when that high note just echoes and echoes and echoes and echoes and echoes forever. And so the idea here is I did this very last thing I did to this patch. I just used the same technique, except that I'm producing the signal, right? I set this to 0, then I set it very high. Then when it's too late to matter, I set it back down, right? And that signal's coming out of this port and coming right back into the NerdSeq. And just like the other track, I have it reading that input. I'm not gonna necessarily wait until that bar shows up because it takes a few repetitions, but it's the same trick. I just thought it was kind of neat to one, use that trick to make it more likely you get that beautiful sound, and two, to self-patch the NerdSeq, because who does that? Now, the Mimeophon itself, I definitely have a few words for, because what an incredible, gorgeous machine that is Catherine and Cat hair. And remember what I said previously about, like, when I first got into modular, I thought that modular would mostly be about access to specific modules, and the Mimeophon is a module that absolutely makes that true, and yet it's definitely not a module that I was thinking of when I first made that statement, you know? Like, you would never expect that a simple delay reverb filter machine, which is really what this is, right? It has a memory buffer in it, but it's really mostly just to play delays. It's pretty flexible with how you can play delays, but it mostly just plays delays. It's got a filter in it, it's got a reverb in it, it has some other cool tricks, but that's really all it does. It just sounds breathtaking. Every single thing you put in the Mimeophon, you can sit here and not use modular at all and turn these knobs. I have. In fact, in the track where this Wurlitzer clip comes from, which maybe I'll tell you about someday, I do just sit here and turn knobs on the Mimeophon. This module is reason to get into modular. Like, get this module and get whatever the bare minimum input and output and power you need is to run this thing, because it's just gorgeous. There's nothing like it. But I guess I should talk about what modular has become to me in the time since I've actually been playing with it. And I think that a lot of it is that same infection that you hear so many other people talk about, where you never expect, I think, to sit down at an interface that looks like this, with just all these same looking inputs and outputs and all this technicality. You never expect it to be a beautiful, inviting environment to find new things and try things out and discover new sounds, and yet it absolutely is. I think a lot of it is down to the other real reason to get into modular, which is, yeah, it is the modules. It's the amount of love that's put into every single one of these things because they could. And I think where it all leads is just this amazing place where you can sit down and be surprised by your own ideas. Be surprised by not even your own ideas, your own whims. What will happen if I try this? And I think that's why so many people gravitate towards noise out of the machine in modular. Me, I kind of wanted to take that energy and push it in a more controlled direction, and so that's how you ended up with this sort of like randomness here. I'm still searching, I'm still pushing a lot of different signals around all the time. But I do definitely want to try to curate it some, and so that's how you end up with this kind of setup over here. So, I don't really think I have anything further to say about any of this. I guess I could comment on how beautiful the Lubadh sounds, but I sort of did already. I mean, this main loop you're hearing, it's just a Lubadh recording twice and a little Tanh H. That's all it is. It sounds that good. It came off a piano. And beats, I haven't had it long enough to have an opinion. But I'm very glad that I took this very expensive dive into modular. And I think you'll see a lot more from me soon. So I will try to have more pieces of many different kinds up, as well as patch notes on them, and expect a lot of non-modular stuff as well. I'm pretty busy, so it's going to be sporadic, but please subscribe. I don't waste your time, and I'll see you next time.